Michael, really appreciate you carving out some time today for us. I've got a whole list of different topics here I'd love to dive into here today. And I think, to set the stage here, really, I'd love to go back to the beginning of your journey, in terms of mental performance. What got you into mental performance and how did you know that this is it? This is what I want to do.
Okay, first, thanks for including me in your community and what you're doing. I've appreciated your work. So this is a treat for me to be able to swap some stories, and hopefully we have a exchange rather than just a one-way conversation
For
here. But
sure.
yeah, so it started for me when this is all looking back,
Hmm.
so I didn't know at the time as it was unfolding how it was working, but it's pretty clear looking back is when I was a young athlete, surfing was my first sport of choice. And there's two types of surfing. There's free surfing and competitive surfing. And in free surfing, there's a code, and that code was don't talk about it, be about it. Put yourself in the most dangerous wave, of the day and experience that fully. And then don't check to see if anyone's looking, just know that, have this internal knowing. And, it's the quote unquote hardcore approach. And I fit in that. That was cool. And I secretly kind of wanted some people to say that was cool, like, but
Yeah.
that culture was great for me. And then flip over to competitive surfing. I wanted to give it a go. And in the hardcore surfing world, it was like, those kooks over there that are competing, they're blowing it for the sport. Like that, they've got it all backwards. They're sponsored and there's stickers on their board and they're doing splashy things. And
Yeah.
I wanted to give it a go. And I should set a little more context is that when I was young, and I'm talking like in 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I wasn't exposed to the ocean for surfing. And so I tried. My parents introduced me to stick and ball sport.
Yeah.
And it was obvious. It was like this reaction I had, which was like, what are these adults screaming at us for? And what are all these rules? Who made up these rules? Like, what do you mean if you put your foot on the line, you're out? Like, shit, I got control of the ball. Let's go.
Yeah.
I'm thinking soccer right now.
Yeah.
So I didn't get these artificial rules and these kind of adults screaming at kids. And so I didn't vibe it. And that when I found action sports, skateboarding, surfing, motocross, BMX, I was like, oh, Mother Nature's the teacher. Like,
Nice.
okay, I got respect. So back to surfing, as soon as I lent my hand to competitive surfing, I was a disaster, dude. Like all these people on the beach judging me and
Yeah.
critiquing me. And
Something
like,
else, right?
I couldn't get it right. And I understand now I understand exactly what was happening, but it was this moment where it was another competitor. He was a few years older than me and he paddled by me. There was just three of us out in the water, clean conditions. It was like 8 a.m, exactly what you would hope for, about head high waves, super glassy, great conditions.
Nice.
And he paddles by me and he says, Gervais, I surf with you every day out here. You got to stop worrying about what other people are thinking about you. I was like, how does he know?
Yeah. Yeah. How
How
can you
does he know?
tell?
Like, yeah, how did he knew? Cause he struggled with it probably, you spot it, you got it. And so from that moment, I didn't know what sports psychology was. I didn't know anything, but it kind of hit me, which was like, yeah, my body hasn't changed. My skills are the same as yesterday. The hell? It was my mind.
Hmm.
And so eventually, that was the age 15. Eventually, it set me down this path to really want to understand how the mind works because we take it everywhere we go: boardroom, living room, ocean, pitch, field, court, whatever it might be, we take it. And I wanted to get that thing dialed in because it was such a mess. And so that's how it started for me.
It's interesting. I mean, I growing up playing a lot of team sports, it's very reactionary. You get into the flow of things, and so you shake off a lot of that. And playing into some individual sports, I started playing golf late in my high school years and started getting into it. And then all of a sudden, you played in the tournament. And a little bit similar to what you're saying is now all of a sudden everyone's looking at you rather than just being on the course with your buddies. And all these internal thought, you have so much time to think rather than react and respond. And if we sort of fast forward to the early stages of your career, are there some moments that stick out with working with athletes, that were particularly challenging at that point, or that really forced you to push yourself outside of that initial comfort zone that we have when we have our training and some of the philosophies we want to lay down, but then that reality of the real world practice, presents roadblocks in itself, right?
Yeah, that's a cool question. No one's ever asked me that before. What happened early on for me was that right after my graduate training, I needed a job. And so action sports, they weren't hiring. It's a little bit off access, backcountry. So I found myself in pro sport. It was stick and ball. And so
You're back.
I'm back, and I didn't quite get it at that time, and they didn't quite. It just wasn't a great fit. So I left after about 5 years pro sport and went. Red Bull fired up a high performance program. I was fortunate enough to kind of find a spot in that emerging discipline of sports science inside of action sports, and it was great. It was super electric. It was awesome. And so to answer your question, there was a project I worked on called Red Bull Stratos. And so Felix Baumgartner was the athlete who the team built a capsule. And this was a aerospace engineered, project.
Yeah.
And they built a capsule, took them up to 130,000 feet, which is up there, and it's 100,000 feet higher than an airliner. And it's kind of the curvature of space. It's right about where you would shoot off to zero gravity into outer space and kind of be out of orbit. There's enough that that part wasn't dangerous, but it was just really high.
Yeah.
And, the project started to skid because he was developing some fear around, the whole thing. And so we did some good, honest work. So if you lose a game in stick and ball,
sucks, but
okay, it sucks,
not the end of the world.
But yeah, it's not like it was, I don't know, 200 or 1,000 years ago where the warring tribe took your family, okay, that loss, that's a bad loss. That's the worst. That's as bad as it gets. Right. So in stick and ball, it's so far from that. And then this one was somewhere in between, which is if he makes mistakes or if we made a mistake in our preparation and training, or if somebody on the design capsule, made a mistake, like his life is, at risk. And so that's when I had a moment where I was like, I had to take that leap from science, using good science, grounded, well-tested laboratory science, and then bridge it into an environment that has not been tested in the environment that we were working in. So that bridge there's a leap that happens in there. And that's what would keep me up at night, which is taking good grounded science. One, to get your arms around that's a full lift in and of itself. Yeah. And then to have enough reference points and contextual understanding. And those are two, like contextual understanding and reference points are two different dynamic requirements to do good applied science. And to have those in place with a little bit of intuition to say, I think this is how it needs to fold for these circumstances, for Red Bull Stratos, for example.
Yeah.
And there was a moment where we didn't know. And so we had to kind of work through some of that stuff. And that was a moment where it eventually worked out to kind of get to the end of the story. He was successful and everything was good.
Put the link to the clip.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That was a good experience. That leap when the stakes are that high, I think for all of us applied scientists and athletes that are trying to sort this thing out, it's like, do you really know your shit? And so that's when you can't all of a sudden zoom forward, like I got a crash course on whatever this approach is and figure it out. Like you just have to have those reference points, which takes time, the contextual understanding, and then all of that science to be able to make an innovation, a required innovation. So that was a time that was really testing.
I was going to say, I imagine it takes a lot of reading of the athlete too, and the individual in front of you to be able to nudge and adjust them as they need, because it's going to be different if there was a different athlete or extreme athlete in that situation, I imagine, right?
Yeah, the relationship is foundational for psychology. And it's like been found to be somewhere around 60 to 70% of intervention effects is based on the relationship itself, which is phenomenal. So if you come in with the best tool, but you don't have any sort of connection, it usually doesn't work out. So to your point, yes.
And it seems to explain, I mean, if we kind of pivot to medicine and chronic disease, people who go to the doctor, unfortunately, are struggling with high blood sugars, high blood pressure, prediabetes. they only get 15 minutes with their doctor, and it's difficult for the physician to even be able to take on board all these things to build this relationship and then provide, adequate direction when we talk about, nutrition or sleep or, mindset being such key pillars that we know now are important for these kind of things. And, I want to follow on what we were talking about with your athlete there, and this concept that I hear, I've heard you talk about for many years around personal philosophies and how we all have one, but if we're not actively participating in forming this personal philosophy, then a lot of all the subconscious thoughts and debris and junk thoughts that we all have can start to form your own personal philosophy for you. Can you unpack that a little more for us?
Yeah, there's two things in here. Let me pin that. Don't let me forget the core of your question. But you hit on something right before that I think is really powerful, is that when we are going to an expert, a medical provider or whomever, right? Let's just do the medical world for a moment. And it's 15 minutes. It's not enough. Mm-hmm. And so I'm classically trained as a psychologist, which means that we are trained to understand a cluster of symptoms represents likely this sort of diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So traditional medical models are working from a disease approach, a broken approach, to say, what are the symptoms so I can categorize it so that I can, in my mind, I can pull down what best practices are for that symptom cluster, call it a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. In 15 minutes, if a doc doesn't take his pen out of his hand, me included, right? I don't work this way anymore. Like, it doesn't take the pen out of the hand and really feel, and then to have a first principle to not diagnose, but to see and feel, then I'm not interested in that practitioner working with me. I like that they can categorize and clump and lump for speed and efficiency. That's great. That's really good to have a decision tree.
Very good.
Yeah, efficiency medicine. And so that's cool. But I don't fit in boxes. Neither do you, Doc. Like, our bodies are local. Our minds are non-local. If you can get your arms around that for a minute, it's a cool concept. And then the symptoms aren't quite clean. So all I'm saying right now is that it takes time to really understand person. 15 minutes is the efficiency model, not the human flourishing model. Mm-hmm. And then, so from that point, if we slightly pivot over, time is expensive. So I get why we're in that model, right? I totally get it. But if we have the ability to sit with people that can afford like a real understanding of you, you will have better results in your life. And you won't box yourself into a set of symptoms or a cluster, call it a diagnosis, or over-identify with the way the expert sees you. It is materially important that you first understand who you are. What are your guiding principles? And this is the segue into the core part of your question. If you abdicate and you allow the external world to over-index or influence in any way really who you are, it's a long road. It's a long life from a very stressful point of view, because each time you go into a new setting, you have to calibrate, what do they think of me? Mm-hmm. And that's exhausting, right? And so we want to flip the model. And the most powerful people I know, the half percenters that are doing the thing that are changing sport, changing an industry, maybe changing the way we understand human potential, is that the external world does not influence their internal. And so they're working from the inside out. And so a personal philosophy is a fancy, like 2-word, little hyphenated clause there to shorthand, like, what are your guiding principles? What are your first principles in life? And if you don't know them, you're going to get whipped around. So let's do this first principle work and write that stuff down. And then the next part of that is, like, if you can't get it out under duress, it's probably just an academic exercise. Mm-hmm. So, like, you want to be able to get those first principles at least intellectually clear and anchored. And then you want to practice them in such a way that they are as automatic as your signature of your autograph. Like, it's as automatic as you possibly can. And that's how this work comes to life.
It is a daunting task, isn't it? I mean, because it's something that's dynamic and it's evolving and it's changing. So even in nutrition, so much of the work is mindset based and, again, relationship based to get people to actually comply. And I've been surprised at, the feedback or the progress people can make when they do lean into this, but even surprised at how some very successful people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, particularly men more so than even women, if I have to say, can be a little bit resistant, or almost, it almost takes them off guard to actually have to pause, zoom out 30,000 feet and really assess their own values versus just kind of chasing, doing, going, achieving.
Yeah. Ditto. I understand. I agree 100%. Yeah. And I don't think though that there's a difference for the, let's say the difference between the half percenters and the 0.01 percenters, like they're driving for this.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh, this is great, and they're not caught in the, sometimes they're caught in it, but they understand the difference between the treadmill type of life versus like this purpose driven, let me use my imagination to see the future as clearly as I can. And then let me back in all the capabilities, technical, physical, nutritional, mental, that I need
mm-hmm.
to be able to have that future even be a shot, so, and they also understand, Marc, that you're not even in the game if you don't know how your mind works. You're not even in the fucking game, honestly. So like you have to know how your mind works and how they work with emotions and the difference between emotions and feelings, and to be able to have command of yourself in any environment. Jesus, like it's a prerequisite in that space.
And that leads into today, we still hear a lot of this championship or bust mentality, right? It's winning a championship or the years of failure. Anything apart from the trophy means we haven't succeeded. And so, very binary, very ultra specific. And you've alluded to obviously vision here. So, can you differentiate between goals and vision and the potential pitfalls of the sort of, if we didn't place first, then we finished last?
Yeah, it isn't black and white easy.
It is easy. It's nice. Very straightforward.
Yeah, but it's there's many more colors, So if we just think about physics and some of the more physical forms, like, so it's the same holds true mentally. And so I mean, here's the deal is for me is that if I don't help a team win, I'm not asked back. So the reality is, whether it's business or sport, this is not just a grand experiment. Like there is a required outcome that is directly related to finances, and there's winning pays.
Yeah.
So like the investment by the owner is, might be binary, and it might have a little sensitivity to what it takes to win, which is a zigzagged up and down, very complicated approach of getting better, unless you get really lucky, And so it depends on kind of ownership and the philosophy that's guiding underneath. And the win or bust is, I don't know. I don't want to work for those organizations. It's just missing something uber sensitive about what really happens. And so they're kind of working in an alternate universe that is not how progress takes place. I don't know what more to say to that other than I haven't been part of a winning program that has ever said that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. But I didn't answer your question.
Well, I mean, obviously fear drives a lot of progress. The competition, the fear of failure pushes us to work harder, to practice longer hours. But it all can also, to what we started with in the discussion, can lead to that fight, flight, freeze mode where all of a sudden we can't express all the things we need to express, whether it's at work or on the playing field. And I've heard the quote, how, acceptance of the present moment is where fear cannot exist. And so, is that true? Can you, again, unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I'm not sure who the author of that idea was, but the present moment is where we have access to what is true. And so I don't want to get too esoteric here, but I'll do my best to make this as concrete as possible, is that what we're trying to do is to link this moment and the next and the next and the next, as many thin slices of a moment as we can together. And when we string a bunch together, we find ourselves in what scientists call flow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the present moment is the entryway in to high performance. It's the entryway into wisdom. It's the entryway into experiencing the experience. So if I am nervous, pretending like I'm not is a fool's game. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's one, it takes a lot of energy to fake anything, pretend anything. That's kind of a joke. So if I'm aware that I'm nervous and I can label it, so I've got some emotional intelligence to go, oh, this is nervousness. And then say, oh, it's actually, yeah, it's in my stomach. That's interesting. All right, cool. And then I've got a couple skills to be able to work with it. So just naming it decreases it.
Yep.
And a skill of breathing or self-talk that is grounded and true, and I'm not making stuff up like some self-affirmation bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
But like you're saying it, and then, or you label it, you recognize it without judgment and critique, which is the practice of mindfulness, essentially gives you that skill and ability. And then you've got some skills to work with it. So fear does exist. And if you're aware of it in the present moment, you can do something with it. What happens for many people is that the awareness game is not very sophisticated. So it's kind of like, imagine if we're at the top of a rapids, right? You and I push off and like we're cruising is good. And then we can hear the rapids down the way.
Yeah.
And we know that we're going to kind of be up against something. And then all of a sudden we take a big chunk of time out of it. And then all of a sudden we're in the rapids thrashing. So that's what happens for many people is it's all good when it's good, it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
And they know maybe something challenging is coming, but then they somehow lose their way in between all of those moments because they're worrying or thinking about other things or distracted by the present, anything that is not to do with the present moment. But time keeps moving, the river keeps moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find ourselves thrashing and it's like, shit, I'm kind of a wreck. Like my heart's pounding and someone walks by and they're looking like, hey, you good? And I said, yeah, I'm good. And I'm a mess.
Yeah.
Like it's like that joke of a sequence that I'm just describing is more common than I think any of us would want, but it doesn't,
sure.
We don't have to be that way. It doesn't need to be that way.
And when you talk about breathing techniques or mindfulness techniques, are there certain ones for, athletes or practitioners for just getting into this that you use as a way to start to build up that skill set?
So mindfulness is, it's necessary, but not sufficient. And I hear my colleagues going, oh my God, why does he keep saying that? Because it is necessary. Mindfulness is one, it's a practice that's been around 2,600 years. The science around it is ridiculous. And at one level, it is increasing your awareness of what's happening with your thoughts, your emotions, your body, the unfolding present moment. Really, it is a practice of becoming aware. And again, if you're not aware, you're not even in the game. So there are thousands of types of meditations, but there's two main principles that guide them. Okay, so one main principle is called single point. And so single point is set a timer, whatever, 8 minutes, 20 minutes. The research ranges between those two bumpers.
Yeah.
To focus on one thing uncommonly, relentlessly, without judgment and critique. Just focus on it. When your mind wanders, you gently, quickly return back to focusing on it. That's it. And that's a great way to not get caught into the, let's call it, the baggage that can come with an uninformed distance, from a distance, thinking about what mindfulness is, right? There's some baggage that can come with the word meditation. Like, are we hugging trees?
Yeah. What's actually going on?
What are we doing here? Yeah. But if you want to start in a really concrete way and you focus, let's just say like on your inhale and then on your exhale with all of your essence, Marc, focus on the inhale. And then with all of your might and essence, in the easiest, most gentle way, so it's not rigid, focus on your exhale and rinse and repeat for 8 minutes. And that's a challenge now.
I was going to say, it's a good, I get a lot of coaches, SC coaches, therapists, practitioners asking around these strategies for mindfulness, particularly with all types of athletes, but a lot of younger athletes as well. Like, where do we start with just developing? And I've heard some practitioners and scientists talking about, even in kids in preschool, putting a bear or a stuffed toy on their belly and starting to experience that, to just be able to introduce. But imagine getting up to that sort of 8 minutes with a younger group would be a great target. Is that right?
Easy. It's wonderful, actually. Like when you first expose people to it, and just like all training, you don't just say, hey, do this and let's check in later. It's more like, let's walk through it together. And people find themselves like, oh God, thank you. Like that was great. And at times it's really challenging, because sometimes it's the hardest 10 minutes of my day, or 20 minutes of my day. But I will say, I would not pretend to walk somebody through a sophisticated nutritional plan. And I've been in the trenches with really switched on nutritionists for a long time. I've got enough of the glow from it. And I studied, my master's degree was in exercise science. So I've got a little bit of, enough to, to recognize what a Krebs cycle is.
Yeah.
So I would not pretend though. So I say to a strength coach, wait, hold on. Is this the direction you're taking your practice? Okay, good. Be great at this then. Because it is a sophisticated science. It is a sophisticated tool. And it might be one of the most complicated dimensions of the human experience, because it's all invisible. And I'm going to sound like I'm on a soapbox here a little bit, but like, what are we doing? Like, honestly, go connect to somebody that's got the right vibe, and they've got a decade or 2 decades under their belt of sitting their ass on a pillow, studying that science themselves to figure out like how mindfulness works, before you say, hey, like, let me lead a session, or you should go do that, or just download this app. I don't know.
I think the frame sometimes comes from just around programs that are underfunded, where there's sort of one person who's doing a lot of different tasks, and typically like an entry level way of saying, how do we get them to start even thinking about some of these things? But I can appreciate that at the other end of the scale, we do see what you're suggesting, which is even at the higher end, we've got practitioners who are S&C doing therapy type things, or vice versa. And like at that point, we need to be getting the people in that are going to be, at the tip of the spear here, doing it correctly, right?
Yeah. And I think even in the underfunded programs is like, there are community members that would love to work with your team, that are highly trained psychologists, or they are mindfulness practitioners that they would love to introduce it because their life is dedicated around it. I think a big part of high performance and human potential exploration is mobilizing and involving the community that you are part of. And so there are resources, and I know it sounds like
especially
I'm out of
today,
touch.
right? I mean,
and I just want to say I'm not out of touch with this. Like, I didn't come from resources, and so I understand I also appreciate scrappiness, but I've lived it, and so it's great. I'd rather have a gym that's a little rusted than the slick Rick everything. It's like I want that. But anyways, so I digress.
I was going to say, I mean, we talked about fear, and then I was going to segue into how great teams, or the vibe, let's call it, around a team, when they're playing well, there's a lot of smiling, there's a lot of laughing. Teams that aren't playing well look pretty serious. And when you get to pro sport, it is serious. And so people take their profession seriously, they practice seriously, yet there's still this undercurrent of joy or laughter or connection that you see. And, we call it great culture on certain teams. Got the NBA playoffs now, and you can see it, you can feel it on those teams, and it feels kind of easy and effervescent. And the other teams, it feels difficult. And the more serious they get, the worse things seem to get. So, from your vantage point, how do those things start to impact, the mindset, the mental performance? Can that come first, or does it come as a result of something in terms of their performance?
That's a cool question. What comes first, confidence or success? Confidence. Now, how do you build confidence? It's not built on success. It's built on what you say to yourself about yourself. And so if you just use that frame for a moment, right? And then map that over to the culture that you're talking about, is that what comes first, the culture or the psychology? It's the psychology. So how does culture get built? It's having an understanding of what culture you would like to have as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I'm speaking to a coach, or I'm speaking to like a captain, right? Or a business lead, is that using this really powerful imagination that we all have, and having an idea of the culture that you'd like to have. And then first order business is like writing that down so it's clear. Second order business is hiring people or drafting people that fit. So what you're describing is like a culture of joy and a culture of intensity. Both work. But what the mismatch is, if you want a culture of joy, but you're hiring a bunch of intense people, you can do it.
Difficult.
It's just, right. But if you want to have kind of a, Stephen Curry, Steve Kerr kind of joy, happiness type thing, but you're only hiring, I don't know, you know what I mean, right? Like really intense.
Mamba mentality.
Yeah. Like it's just, that's where it's not a fit. Okay. And then what you want to do underneath of that is develop the psychological skills to play with joy, or develop the psychological skills to stay deeply focused when you're intense.
Mm-hmm.
And those are somewhat different, not materially different, but there's a different reason. You're pointing to a different place for the skill and using that skill, right? Hammer's a hammer, but if you're pointing at a different way, sometimes you got to tap it lightly and sometimes you just got to take a big swing. And
100%.
That's the analogy for the mental skill. But that's how the formula really works. But what you're describing is when you see in a culture that they look like they're really tense, it's probably because they haven't trained how to have that space in the intensity. Or maybe the team lead is saying, we need to play fun, but they hired a bunch of intense dudes or women, like that's just a mismatch.
And how does body language fit into this? I've heard Jim Afrema talk about how, body language is sort of a sign or signal of mental toughness. And the athlete I often think about is Rory McIlroy back in the day when he was younger, winning majors and just sort of strutting down the fairways, looking like he's not thinking twice about any shots that he's hitting and absolutely striping it. And then as his career progresses, still a tremendous golfer, obviously top 5, top 10, but somehow not winning those majors. And all of a sudden we don't seem to see the same, whether it's smile or walk or these types of things. Like, is the body language, again, can we fake the body language to elicit the mental state we want to be in? Or is the mental state just going to impact the body language and we're at the mercy of it? How does that work?
Yeah. Two ideas that are baked in there is one, as just a first principle, like I'm not going to support anything in my life that is fake. So like fake it till you make it. I don't get it. Like I don't want my surgeon to fake it. I don't want my psychologist to fake it. Like like I want the real thing, like whatever the real thing is, like, let's work with it. But what you're asking there is bottom up or top down. So if we change our physical form, does it influence our mind? Yeah. If we change our mind, does it influence our physical form? Yeah. And then if you add one more layer of complexity, is that we are communicating to ourselves more than we communicate to anyone else. And we're communicating to others in two ways, verbally and non-verbally. Okay. So the words and what we're looking for in others and ourselves is alignment, because that indicates a level of trust. So when there's misalignment, it's like, what is really going on? And humans are really good at picking up bullshit, but like it's a survival tactic deep in the brain. So again, there's two levels of communication, verbal and nonverbal. In the nonverbal, it's body language and micro expressions. And so we are telling our community oftentimes how we're thinking. And if we've trained our thoughts to be a certain way, let's call it joyful, and grateful and focused. And when we're at the first tee and we've trained our mind to go, God, I love this. Like, I really love it. This is awesome that this is my life. And like, okay, let me lock in and focus. Then body language would be the natural downstream of that. So the work starts upstream. Let's go back to the beginnings of getting in the river together and understand how to do the work. So the downstream is eloquent. If you work from the bottom up, it's harder, but we don't, it's so much easier to work with the physical form than the non-physical.
Yeah.
The deeper work is non-physical. Okay. But if you wanted to, if you're like, I don't get what you're talking about.
Or is that like an acute way, an acute strategy whilst you're building out the mental, the non-physical of being able to influence the body to kind of get you through those periods? Would that be fair to say? Or
I don't think the Band-Aid really holds up.
gotcha.
I like the word acute, right? But I don't think that Band-Aid, like stand with your head up, your shoulders.
Isn't going to work.
Yeah. Like head up, shoulders back. That's cool for a moment. But then as soon as I go, oh shit though, oh my God, Jesus. Like all of a sudden I'm going into a protect posture, which is not, and then if I'm saying to myself, Jesus, oh my God, but my head is up, now I got that misalignment.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Now that's like yeah. So I'll be super concrete with this. Your thoughts are your responsibility. Get to know your thoughts, know how to work with your thoughts and emotions, know what optimal, productive, progressive thinking looks like for you. And then you become a beacon of alignment where you walk into any environment and you're like, hey, I'm at home with me. Mm-hmm. I know exactly how to switch on this internal system to be my best. That's not hard. Go get a sports psych, get a mental skills, person to go do that deep work with. And if you don't have that resource, listen to podcasts, like read books.
Access information, right?
Yeah, access, mobilize your community or mobilize the information that's available. And then thirdly on it is like, listen to yourself. That's where mindfulness comes in. Like without judgment, critique, like know how thought one and thought two work with emotion one and emotion two. Figure it out.
And for you, is journaling a part of that for individuals, of being able to write down some of these thoughts, to be able to sort of see them concretely versus having these things kind of pinging around? What is it, 60,000 thoughts a day that everyone is having? Some of the recurring ones that might be causing anxiety, stress.
Yeah, we don't know the exact number because we can't see it, but there's an interesting math that you get to. I know the research that you're pointing to for the 60,000. Journaling is found to be a best practice. I don't do it. I write stuff down so I don't lose it. Mm-hmm. And I write stuff down that I really want to make concrete.
Okay.
So that's why it's a best practice, but I don't journal every day. Mm-hmm. I'd rather do mindfulness work. There's three approaches that I'd suggest for folks that want to discover more.
Yeah.
Mindfulness, journaling, and conversations with wise people. And having some sort of hybrid or deep commitment to one or all of those would be the most accelerated path for discovery.
Tremendous. And, that whole discussion leads me into today's world where, mental health is front and center, and seemingly over the last decade, whether you're an early teen or middle age or older adult, anxiety, depression rates are really going up across the board. And so it seems that obviously the focus of, we've seen sleep science, nutrition science in the last couple decades really exploding. And now obviously mindset and mental performance has always been important, but seemingly in the last 5 years or so, it's really become front and center in people's attention and minds. And, in my practice, I see a lot of anxiety and depression increasing, and in surprising situations, where you might say, well, geez, this person has, this job, this status, this success, why might they be experiencing this? And I've heard, another quote around this, maybe you can give us your take on, which is, anxiety is when you don't live up to the expectations of others, and depression is when you don't live up to your own.
The way I think about anxiety in a most simplest form is that it's an excessive worry about what could go wrong. Mm-hmm. The word excessive is the important part. So anxiety is a clinical term that means something in the psychological professional world. Anxiousness and worry are, non-clinical, mm-hmm. but they're subcomponents to have an anxiety attack, or to be clinically have anxiety. But essentially, it's an excessive worry about later.
Yeah.
And it's either experienced like in your mind or experienced in your body. It's called somatic anxiety, and or both. Okay. So anxiety is future oriented, and then depression is, it's more critical. And so depression is it's marked by three components. I suck, you suck, the world sucks. And then an underlying, it's always going to be like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm putting in the word suck for something else, like, I see the bad in you, I see the bad in me, and I see the bad in the world. And, I see the negative in you, the negative in me, the negative in the world. And it's kind of always going to be like this. So depression is...
That last piece seems quite powerful, doesn't it? That it's always going to be like this component.
Yeah, that's the hard part. And then it's experienced both mentally and physically as well. And then I say that because that's how I conceptualize the two. And then we don't have a psychological disorder that is not correlated with sleep, a sleep disorder. So there's not one. They're intimately linked. And so chicken and egg, I'm not talking in that order. I'm just saying the two are intimately linked. And then in this profession of sport and performance psychology, there's two components to it. There's the mental health piece,
mm-hmm.
and then there's also the optimization and high performance piece. And so just kind of getting your arms around those two, there's a unique intersection between those two. They can live alone, but they rarely do.
Continuum.
Yeah, there's a continuum between the two. And the intersection is what I'm most interested in. Like, high performance without well-being is unsustainable. It can happen, it can definitely happen. Well-being without performance, that can happen, So I'm interested in that intersection. It's like a nested type of vibrancy that is so electric. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that picture around anxiety of just sort of being frayed at the edges of, like you mentioned, underslept, over-caffeinated, glucose excursions, high and low through the day. We've got this individual who's just burning the candle at both ends. And then it's, we pick up on it exacerbates these types of symptoms that you describe. And, from a nutrition standpoint, it's always interesting because we tend to see, over 6 milligrams per kg of caffeine's going in. We're wondering why we can't sleep. We're consuming sugar right before bed because of the, that constant stream of stress. And so from that angle, I'm always viewing my role as just being able to raise the playing field, because we're not going to be able to get into all the psychological areas that a psychologist or psychiatrist is going to be able to do. But it's always interesting how even just addressing some of those things seems to be able to raise the tide, if you will, to be able to better support some outcomes. I'm not sure, what your experience is. Obviously, you mentioned having some experience with nutrition, how you integrate it, but interested to hear your thoughts on how that holistic model really impacts some of these mental health conditions.
Humans are so multidimensional that as many evidence-based understandings as we can have, the better we can find solutions and the most efficient way through. And so, for example, if somebody is presenting with, let's say, performance anxiety and just kind of a little too edgy, whatever, before competitions, and we're like, okay, well, let's take a look at things. And it seems to be like, and they haven't done a blood draw, or they haven't looked at, I don't know, tryptophan, tyrosine. They haven't looked at, some basic stuff, then, or homovanillate, or they haven't looked at the stuff around that from a neuropeptide standpoint, like, oh, well, that would be an opportunity. And then for me, it's not that different than asking them about sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we've got decent, consumer grade sleep monitoring, decent, call it, that we're starting to see decent assessments for at scale for nutrition. And obviously, if you can work with someone like yourself that has a full command and it's bespoke and customized, then that's where we really it starts to come alive. And I like things, I like to understand like the neurotransmitter support systems. I also like to look at C-reactive protein as an indicator of some stress. I like to look at oleic acid and nervonic acid, omegas. I like to look at those for like, what is the support mechanisms for neural firing?
Yeah.
So there's that type of stuff I'm interested in. And I'm sure there's lots more that you would say is related to brain performance and psychological performance as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like you mentioned, around even the sleep technology. I mean, I always find it interesting that one of the biggest aha moments for clients is just seeing that, after half a bottle of wine, their resting heart rate overnight goes from 60 to 85, right? So despite all the other bells and whistles that the technology provides, that's sort of one of the big moments that, you know, you've been telling your client to cut back for X amount of months, but now they can actually see it for themselves. And, you know, I don't want to take any red wine away from anyone on the weekends, but if we're doing it, you know, 6-7 nights a week and we're struggling with sleep or mood and recovery, these kind of things, and it becomes a key.
How many hours for you does it take to process 7-ounce glass of wine before it affects your sleep?
I've got 3 small kids at home, so I feel like how wine affects me now is much different than 10 years ago. I feel like if I even get past a glass the next morning, I can feel the sluggishness, and, you know, the impact on deeper sleep and the REM sleep starts to really rear its head a little bit for me.
I found 2 hours, you know, so like if I had 2 glasses, I need 4 hours before to at least process enough where it's not compromising sleep. And there's still a slight compromise, but not a rich compromise.
Yeah, and that's always the double-edged sword of starting earlier helps to then get better sleep. But if you don't stop, then all of a sudden you're at 3 or 4 glasses. Talking about, you know, coaches' health, practitioners' health, frankly, anybody's health in midlife who's got a busy job, maybe kids at home. Because when you think of athletes and overtraining, we see things like low mood being a common symptom of overtraining. And for the rest of the coaches and practitioners and the rest of us in their 40s and beyond, it's the life load, right? It's the lack of sleep, it's the busy workplace, it's the kids and family commitments that then becomes difficult to recover from. And we see the similar symptoms of an athlete overtraining. We see the lower mood, lower libido, all these types of things. And so coaches are great at providing that support to their group, but oftentimes we don't see them providing that support to themselves. As someone who works in performance, what aspects can you convey to the performance staff, or how do you go about some of those conversations?
Okay. This is really important because this is like when the teacher's tired, the students will notice that, you know? So over time, like you can get by for a little bit, but when we start to turn the gaze on the coaches of them being their very best from a psychological, physiological perspective, it's awesome. They love it. And making some of those changes is really hard as well for them. And so just starting with the basics, like, okay, what are you eating? What are the patterns of eating? Macronutrients first from your perspective. And then from my perspective, it's like more like, okay, how is sleep? You know, what are the thoughts that are working for you? Do you have any breathing strategies, you know, to help you through high stress experiences? And so, you know, like, when we turn the gaze on them, it's awesome. They love it. They eat it up. And sometimes they rigidly don't want to. There's an old model that, you know, in the NFL that you got to get there at 6 a.m. and you're not a grinder unless you leave, you know, after 10. And so that's a long work day for 8 months straight.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and again, I guess they're chipping away at those types of things when the culture's set. It's really like swimming against the current pretty intensely, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. However, though, like I said, they want it. And it's like when a coach is struggling, say they throw out their back or like a disc has slipped or something, I understand that the coach doesn't want to get on the table because the athlete, you know, needs the work first. But if that coach is a distraction and a mess, and he, you know, his pain is getting in the way of him being able to sleep well and do good work and think well, like we got to get him on the table. Same for psychology.
Yeah, 100%. Mike, I want to respect your time here. A couple last questions for you. You know, with your podcast over the years, I'm wondering, obviously you've had so many tremendous guests. Are there some that come to mind just right now off the cuff of moments where you really felt, you know, some wisdom or some pearls that were coming up from different topics that you covered over the time that have really actually influenced you or your practice over the years?
One of the ones I think that's coming up right now is on frameworks for leadership. And the podcast was with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. And we got right down into his philosophy and how he's built a framework to be able to help people have their own as well. And so that's a really good one. I think that, you know, for leaders in your community, you'll love that one. And then Bob Bowman was Michael Phelps' coach for a long time. And he shared stories about how much mental imagery they did. Michael Phelps would see himself perform well, obviously, at record pace time. And he'd also see himself have record pace time with his goggles filling up and his suit kind of, getting ripped off, and like he's seeing all of that compromised states, so that there was very few surprises, like he was able to button it all up. And so ranging from, coaches to leaders, all the way to, we've had some musicians on that, like Nile Rodgers, while you might not know his name, he's kind of the funk behind so many hits.
Big hits, yeah.
And so, like thinking about the performers behind the scenes as well. And he's a guitarist, so he's out front as well. But like, so there's just a deep range of folks that are kicking ass on the world stage.
Awesome. And when you look at the future, the evolution of mental performance over the next 5 or 10 years, what's got you excited in the research for things that are coming down the pipeline that are going to be the next evolution here? Because as mental performance is sort of taking center stage here as the next frontier, really, to really push forward.
I think what's taking place is the language is going to be more familiar and the practices will be more integrated. And so right now, even 20 years ago, you ask a coach or an athlete, like, how important is the mental part of the game? And they nod their head. Oh yeah, at this level. And then you say, well, okay, so how much time in the day are we spending on the training of the mind? And they're like, what? Like, we're always doing it. Oh, really? Always? What do you mean by always? And then when you drill into it, it's like, oh, well, we tell the guys they should do some imagery like at home. It's like,
by always it means never.
Yeah, that means never, like, or the very special ones, So anyways, the language is going to become more familiar, and the sensitivity in that language is going to, it's going to be great. And then how to practice training your self-talk or being calm. Confidence is a skill that we can train. Imagery, fill in the blanks. Like, there's so many that will become. So I think what we're going to see is not necessarily like this mad rush to the frontier. We're going to see more of a foundational approach, from pros all the way down to the youth in between. We're going to see like it embedded more often, which is exciting.
Tremendous. And quickly, last one for you. With technology and obviously working with practitioners, it's such a complex space. How do we navigate that intersection? Because we could obviously learn so many skills through an app, but through this conversation, talking about how it's to build that relationship is 2/3 of the solution to be able to achieve some of these things. And so I always wonder, how do we sort of square that circle?
There are incredible technologies that are helping us advance human potential. And knowing the difference between a toy and a tool is really important. So practitioners knowing the difference and not thinking that something is a tool when actually it doesn't hold up to science. So there's a lot of toys that are presenting like tools from a cognitive performance standpoint. So knowing that difference will be materially important. And if you don't know the difference, like, have someone in your community that's what they know.
Yeah.
So that's important. The other piece that is exciting that I think is taking place is that we're having more honest conversations. So there's a first principle that I'll share with you that has been important to me, is that through relationships, we become. And so it's the relationships in this order: your relationship with yourself. So if you add that dimension of honesty, like having honest conversations with yourself, that's starting to happen more. Relationships with others and having honest conversations with each other about each other, that's happening more. We're becoming more sophisticated. Relationships with the planet, that's happening. Relationships with machines. And I'm ahead of myself here, but in 9 years, we will have a computer that is smarter than the smartest person on the planet. So we are going to need relationships with machines in meaningful ways. And if we treat them like we're afraid of them and they're smarter than us,
the robot dogs,
and they're smarter than us, they are right. They will feel that, oh, these humans are ostracizing us, like, maybe we should band together against the humans. And there's a sci-fi narrative in here somewhere.
Yeah,
but
I was going to say,
through relationships that we become, and the honesty of those conversations are the governor to your potential. If you're not honest with yourself, there's a governor on your potential. And that shit takes courage. And then same with other people. And I'll add this last dimension is that nobody does the extraordinary alone. So those relationships with others are materially important. And if they're not honest, we've got a governor on the potential of what we can do together. So I think that framework holds true.
Tremendous. I mean, great insights as always, Mike. Really appreciate you carving out some time. I'm sure everyone knows how to get in touch with you, but what's the best place to stay connected and then listen to the podcast?
Yeah, man, I appreciate this conversation and the questions and introducing me to your community in this way. Thank you. Finding Mastery as a podcast on all the players. The website is findingmastery.net. And you can find about, what we're doing in corporate environments and what some of the individual solutions we have for folks to train their mind. And so it's both of them. Yeah. So findingmastery.net. And then the social world is fun. Like it's awesome. Like we have fun on all the different platforms that way too.
Awesome. Listen, thanks again. I've always appreciate the time.
Thanks, Marc.